And welcome to another Bike Bros bike review. Today we're looking at the 2021 Giant Fathom 1 with the 27.5-inch wheels version. We are going to take a close look at this. We're going to look at some details, discuss the specifications on here, the geometry, who this is for, and we'll even tell you the weight. This is the 2021 Giant Fathom 1. So from Giant, we have 4 different bikes that carry the Fathom name. There is the Fathom 2 and Fathom 1 with 27.5-inch wheels, and there is a Fathom 2 and Fathom 1 that are 29ers. They're very, very close to being the same bike with the exception of wheel size. The Fathom 1 is the fancy version, Fathom 2 a little bit cheaper. To give you an idea, Fathom 2s are $1,689 in Canada, and the Fathom 1 is $2,099 in Canada. The bike that we're looking at here today is the 27.5-inch wheeled version, and we are going to take a look at the bits and pieces. So this Fathom 2, it represents basically a hardcore trail hardtail from Giant. And the things that make it a hardcore hardtail are its geometry, tires, componentry. All that stuff adds up to bikes that are meant to be ridden on actual mountain bike trails and can be ridden pretty aggressively. So in this case here, we're looking at a 27.5 by 2.6 tire. This is the Maxxis Ardent Race. So this is a nice, fast rolling tire. So especially if you live somewhere with hard packed trails, this is going to feel awesome. And the 27.5 by 2.6 tire size has sort of taken over where the plus size tires left off a couple of years ago. I would still sort of consider this a plus bike. And with those bigger tires, what you're getting is the ability to ride your tires a little bit softer, which really gives you amazing traction and a little bit of extra comfort. And that sort of traction and comfort, that gives you a better handling bike in corners, in stopping, climbing traction, all that sort of stuff. This is a 1x12 geared bike, so it's got SRAM NX Eagle on here. The cassette is a SRAM SX cassette with an 11 to 50 tooth range. Those tires that we were talking about, they're riding on a Giant 30mm wide rim. We have SRAM SX cranks on here with a proper SRAM narrow wide chainring. This is probably about as sophisticated as narrow wides get. You can see each of those teeth has some extra profiling, and that's to help kind of move dirt away from the chain a little bit and help the chain ride nice and smoothly on there. We have internal cable routing on this bike. So we can see cables coming out down here. We have a dropper post cable coming into the down tube up here. We have 2 different bottle cage mounts within the main triangle and another one again below the down tube here. The bike comes with a Giant dropper post, and it also comes with a quick release, which I always think is a little bit of a weird move, but some companies insist on doing that. The saddle is the new Giant Romero saddle. It's got a nice shape to it and some pretty good padding. I'll show you just some of these details. As always with a Giant, the welds are pretty beautiful on this guy. Like, that is some really high quality stuff. You'll notice that that head tube is quite a short head tube. So to make up for the fact that they've got a 130mm travel fork on here, they're making the head tube relatively short so that you're still able to get weight onto your front wheel for sort of riding hard and having really good cornering abilities with the bike. The fork that's on here, this is the Giant Crest 34 RCL, so that means that it's got 34mm stanchions. It's got through axles, it's got rebound adjustment, which is that red knob down there. We have a compression adjustment, which will take it as far as basically being locked out, and that is an air fork. So we have an air cap underneath there So you can adjust this to basically give you ideal amount of spring for your weight. So that's one of the big benefits of going with an air fork over a spring fork, is if you happen to be heavier or lighter than the average bear, then you're going to be able to get that fork to work really nicely for you. I mentioned that we have a through axle on the front. It is also a through axle rear end on here. Where this matters, once again, goes hand in hand with the fact that this is designed for a little bit more serious rider. Those through axles basically give you a much more solid mechanical connection of your hub to your frame, which gives you more rigidity, I guess, between that sort of connection there, and you're not going to have as much chance of flexing the wheel in the frame. And same thing goes in the fork here as well. It's a boost frame and fork, so that just means the kind of spacing that we have between the hubs. It just means it's basically up to the modern standards. The brakes that we have on here are a Shimano 400 series brake. So these are, there's two different versions of the 400 series brakes. These are the ones that don't have that extra little clampy thing sticking out that means you have to ride your levers further forward or further in. My least favorite thing on a lot of these Giant bikes are these giant waffle grips on here. So my suggestion would be replacing those if you bought this bike and putting some lock-ons on. And I would probably even move my controls in a little bit more than where they are to give you better single finger braking than what we have possible with this current setup. This is what your Giant dropper lever looks like. So it's like a proper style dropper lever. We've got some nice Giant handlebars and stem using a 35mm clamp on there. And so a big standout on this bike is the fact that this is a fully modernized geometry. And by fully modernized, I mean it's got a slack head tube angle at 66 degrees. It's got an appropriately steep seat tube angle at 75 degrees. What that's helping you to do is when you're climbing, you're going to be sitting a little bit more directly above your cranks rather than hanging out over your rear axle. That means your front wheel isn't going to lift quite as easily on climbs, and it's going to keep your weight centered, which is going to keep you able to climb rather than stepping off and giving up. Other parts of the geometry that are modernized, the reach numbers on here, this is a 470mm reach when we're looking at a size large. In a size medium, we're at 445mm. And if you're comparing this to full suspension bikes, those numbers tend to be a little bit shorter on a hardtail than on a full suspension to still be considered sort of modern sort of measurements. Chainstay length on this guy is 435mm, so that puts it in a nice range for being long enough for stability, but short enough that if you're maybe doing a little bit of jumps, a little bit of manuals, anything like that, this bike's going to handle really nicely, and you're going to have a good balance of that reach in the front of the frame to the rear end length. So who is this bike for? I would say that this is a step-up bike. You've already proven to yourself that you love riding mountain bikes, and you're choosing either to go with a hardtail in this case because you want a little bit better componentry for this sort of price. As a comparison, at this $2,099 Canadian, if you were to be buying a full suspension bike, you wouldn't be getting quite as sophisticated a fork probably, and you wouldn't be getting a dropper seat post, and maybe not even getting into a 12-speed drivetrain or those 4-piston brakes. So that's kind of a decision that some people feel like they have to make, is they're going to choose to go with higher end components on a hardtail rather than going with full suspension and maybe having to dumb down the componentry a little bit. Everything on this bike is really set up to give you sort of the best performance without overspending. I would say that this bike sort of gets you in the door on stuff. if down the road, if you happen to destroy something like that rear derailleur. The SX shifter that's on here is still going to work with, if you went from that NX rear derailleur, you'd be able to put a GX derailleur on, and that SX shifter that you have on here is still going to be able to drive that nicely. That's my quick overview of this 2021 Fathom 1, the 27.5-inch wheeled version. This color, I hope that this video gives some sort of an appreciation, because this really is like a beautiful metallic paint job that they put on this bike. This is a size medium, just to give you an idea. I did weigh this bike, sorry, forgot to mention, 28.6 pounds. That is very respectable these days. The tires are set up tubeless. From the factory, you're getting tubeless tires, wide rims. This is all stuff that's adding up to that story I was talking about, like proper performance, and you're just over $2,000. SRAM drivetrain, Shimano 4-piston brakes, Giant 34mm stanchion fork. This is a pile of quality squeezed into that $2,099 price range. Thanks for watching. We are trying to do these videos as much as possible. I am standing in a room that is usually stuffed full of bikes. Almost everything that's showing up these days. We just got some bikes there and they're almost all sold, I think. All that stuff is sold. All that stuff is sold. These are crazy times for getting a bike, so the best of luck to anybody searching for a bike. People are discovering how amazing mountain biking is, so it's no surprise that there's a shortage of bikes. This is an awesome option. I hope wherever you are that you can get your name on a list to get one of these, or keep this on your list for 2022, and maybe there's a little bit more availability. Either way, great bike, Giant Fathom 1. We'll see you in the next video.